Hi, I'm Paul Edwards, author of the Mourner's Woods books, and first and foremost, a monster kid. Tonight, against my better judgment, I'm watching Exorcist II, The Heretic from 1977. When people talk about bad movies, the first thing that comes to mind usually are cheap movies, movies filmed on a shoestring budget by independent filmmakers, sometimes using actors who are not professional full-time actors. And, Ed Wood is considered the king of bad movies in that sense. But honestly, I've always been inclined to be more forgiving of creators who are operating on a shoestring budget and do the best they can with the resources available to them. I'm much more likely to be harsh on a film where there's a big budget, where there are big name actors, where there's not a whole bunch of production limitations, and where this film still turns out to be a disaster. Those are the movies I think of when I think of the worst films ever made. And by that measure, Exorcist II, The Heretic, is easily one of the worst movies that big Hollywood has ever put out. They were handed everything on a platter for this film, okay? In 1973, The Exorcist was not just another horror movie. It was a cultural phenomenon. I remember clearly, I was in the third grade. All anyone was talking about was The Exorcist. And yes, it was rated R, but somehow kids were seeing it anyway. Well, this was the biggest horror movie since Psycho had come out 13 years earlier in 1960. The Exorcist was a huge deal. Everyone was talking about The Exorcist. It was considered a truly great film. And it was certainly fresh in people's minds 4 years later when this film came along. Now, brand name recognition is one thing. They absolutely had brand recognition. They were going to fill a certain number of seats just from the title, Exorcist II. But there was a general feeling that this movie was not going to be as good as the first one. People understood that. And Ellen Burstyn, for example, refused to come back and reprise her role. But, there was a feeling that maybe even if it wasn't great, well, it would be a popular movie. People would certainly go see it. And so, of course, it would make money for the studio. So they went ahead and tried. And they had not only brand name recognition going for them, but they also had an amazing cast. 3 superb actors were in this film. I mean, 3 of the best actors of their generation. James Earl Jones, Richard Burton, Max von Sydow. Nobody can criticize the cast. They can't blame it on the actors. They can't say, oh, well, we had so-so actors and so the film didn't succeed. No, they had truly great actors. So they had public recognition, they had a big name cast of really good actors, and they had a nice big budget. They had everything going for them. The result was such a disaster that it has gone down in movie history as one of Hollywood's biggest failures. Although it did make money. I can't even say that it didn't make money. It did make money. It made back the cost of making it and then some. So it was profitable. But it's so notoriously bad, mostly because it's a disjointed mess of a story. The story, as much as I can summarize it in a coherent way, is that Richard Burton plays a priest who is investigating the exorcism performed by Father Marin back in 1973 in the first movie. And he has discovered that what we thought happened in the first movie wasn't really true. The first movie, the whole point of it was that this, everyday, ordinary teenage girl could get possessed by the devil and, the horror could strike anybody. In Exorcist II, it turns out that's not true. That Regan McNeil was not just a regular, ordinary adolescent girl. She was a special girl who had a healing ability, and the devil targeted her because the devil knew that Regan had this healing ability. And the devil also has been targeting other children who were born with this healing ability around the world. So right away, we've upended the whole premise of the first film. From there, there's just such a bizarre convolution of half-developed story ideas as Richard Burton travels to Africa to try to investigate the life of a previous one of these special children who had had a demon driven out of him years ago. And there's a whole plot element to this film where there's an electronic device that enables one person to share their thoughts with another person telepathically, but there's nothing mystical involved. It's all scientific. And if you sit down across the table from another person and you both synchronize your thoughts with this crazy machine, you are able to enter into another person's mind, sort of like in the Nightmare on Elm Street movies when you could enter into another person's dream. It was such a half-baked idea, and it had no place in the Exorcist franchise. There was certainly no science fiction elements in the first Exorcist film. So that came out of nowhere. It sounded stupid. The way they portrayed it was stupid. And what they used it for in the movie was stupid. It was just a complete washout. Richard Burton kept a straight face, to his credit, for the scenes using the device, just like James Earl Jones kept a straight face during the scenes where he was the now grown special healer that had been exorcised back when he was a kid. And of course, I'm assuming you've seen The Exorcist, the original Exorcist. Father Merrin did not survive to the end of the original film, but Max von Sydow was back, and they were making flashback scenes in which he was expounding some of his theories. And oh yeah, by the way, it turned out that some of his theories were heretical within Catholic doctrine. He had an idea that the power of evil actually could defeat the power of good. And so he had, in the filmmaker's view, a heretical understanding of the dynamic of good versus evil. This brings us to another thing. If you're going to make a movie that's based on Catholic doctrine, you better get it right. And it's easily available in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. You can look it up. The things that they attributed to Catholic belief make no sense. For example, in one point, one of the characters says, "My faith is in Jesus Christ reborn." What? Nobody believes Jesus Christ was reborn in the Catholic Church. What are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense at all. If you had the Catholic priest say, "My faith is in Jesus Christ," fine. But "my faith is in Jesus Christ reborn," that sounds like someone who has no idea what Catholics believe, who's just trying to throw together some religious sounding words and is going to think that the audience just isn't going to notice. Well, we do notice. That's nonsense. It's gibberish. That's just one example. There's a whole bunch of lines in there that are just gibberish, mock examples of what Catholics supposedly believe that are just not true. And why Father Merrin would be considered the heretic in Exorcist II, the Heretic, isn't clear either, because just because he had some ideas that were wrong, that doesn't make him automatically a heretic. You have to be declared to be a heretic after a formal proceeding in the church. They don't just point to someone and say, "You're a heretic." There's a whole thing to it. So the title doesn't make any sense. Father Merrin's ideas in this, that evil maybe could overcome good, had no basis in the first movie. This is something they just dreamed up for this film. They don't affect the plot because the demon, Pazuzu, is still doing what he's doing, regardless of whether or not Father Merrin thinks he can win. It just doesn't make any sense. The special effects in this film probably would look bad to a modern day viewer. They actually were all right for the time that the film was made in 1977. Some of them are a little over the top, where you're riding on the wings of a locust, being carried by the spirit of Pazuzu in your mind to see these different visions. But, generally they didn't suffer for cheapness. They suffered for stupidity. So Exorcist II meanders its way to a point where eventually there is somewhat of an exorcism being performed. Back at the old McNeil residence from the first movie, except they couldn't get permission to use the famous staircase again, so they had to find another staircase that looked like it. So if you're watching the movies back to back, you're like, wait a minute, is that supposed to be the same staircase? Yeah, it's supposed to be, but it isn't. And there were preposterous special effects in the end. They wanted to do a big finish, and the apartment is being blown apart, walls are falling down, and it's so over the top. You just roll your eyes. Nobody was scared by this movie. People were scared witless by The Exorcist, the first one. Nobody was scared of Exorcist II. It was that bad. There have been subsequent Exorcist movies. They weren't all golden, but none was as bad as Exorcist II. One of the worst films that big Hollywood has ever released. And that brings us to one final thing I want to tell you. This is actually the first time that I've made one video in which I talk about an upcoming video. I'm going to be making, for this Halloween, a showdown video where we're going to compare 3 of the worst horror movies that big Hollywood has ever put out. No Plan 9 from Outer Space, no Manos, The Hand of Fate, no little independent films. We're not going to pick on them. We're going to pick on the big budget Hollywood horror movies that had the resources to be good and were absolutely terrible. And it's going to be a death match between 3 big Hollywood horror flops. And I'm going to talk about which one of these is the worst. The contenders are going to be The Exorcist Part 2, Halloween Ends, and The Mummy 2017. All movies that had nice big budgets, that had good actors in them, and could have gone somewhere, but were absolutely horrible. And in this upcoming video, I'm going to be comparing the 3 movies to determine which one deserves the title of the worst big Hollywood horror movie of all time. So you can look forward to that. In the meantime, if you're a fan of vintage horror and classic monsters, check out my book series. As you can see behind me, I'm the author of the Mourner's Woods books, a series of novels that all take place in a haunted forest. Basically, I write books for people who enjoy 20th century horror movies. That's what it is. My books are available on Amazon. You can find a link in the description below. Thanks for letting me talk to you some about Exorcist II, the Heretic. I appreciate your patience. I'll see you in Mourner's Woods.